Fingers crossed.
It's going to work today. All right, great. All right, well, good morning, everybody. House Committee on Government Operations, Military Affairs here on this lovely Thursday, March 16th. We are starting this morning with H291, an act relating to the creation of the Cybersecurity Advisory Council, and co-sponsor Representative Seward is here. So please tell us about the bill. Thanks for being here.
Good morning, Representative Laura Sibilia, Independent Representative for the Wyndham 2 District in the towns of Dover, Jamaica, Somerset, Stratton, and Wardsboro. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, thank you for the time to talk a bit about H291, which is an act relating to the creation of the Cybersecurity Advisory Council. And I see that you have a number of folks coming in afterwards, so I'd love to just tell you about why I'm really, I think this is really important. This bill begins to solve several problems. The work that we have done previously in previous committees and in the JITAR committee has helped inform, at least for myself and Representative Chase, that legislature is really currently disconnected from and unable to responsibly provide oversight on cybersecurity measures related to protecting our public and private information infrastructure. This bill puts a member of the House and the Senate on an advisory committee with members of state government who typically are responsible, not typically, they are responsible for protecting these structures. We have taken some steps to get ourselves in a better posture. Creating the Agency of Digital Services several years ago was one, and there's been a lot that's been going on. These issues, we're not broadcasting what's happening. So it's been really difficult for the legislature to understand how well we are doing. I think we're doing pretty well, but we don't really have a means of knowing. So this council will be really helpful for the legislature. Cybersecurity practices across the state are disjointed. And so this bill begins to pull together pieces for consistency and standard. So we have 3 branches of government. We've got independently elected constitutional offices, and so disparate activities happening in disparate places. So this starts to coordinate those activities to make sure that we have best practices going on throughout state government, or that we are making recommendations about best practices. And local governments have been largely on their own and are really vulnerable due to inexperience of users and technical tools and skill. And this is something that we have seen across Vermont. A number of our municipalities have had cyber issues. We know that VLCT has been stepping forward in this regard in terms of training, but there is a lot there. There's a lot of vulnerability there. So Vermont municipalities have been caught unprepared, and cyber criminals, we know, are always testing and changing their tactics. This bill officially connects opportunities for cyber advice and training for local municipalities to our state professionals. So this bill would propose to statutorily create a cybersecurity advisory council to advise on the state's cybersecurity infrastructure, standards, and safeguards, and also proposes to have that council biannually review and approve the state standards for critical infrastructure, and also to make recommendations for legislative action. So it's been my sense, having looked to the extent that we have at these issues for the last number of years, everyone is behind in the country. Vermont's been doing okay. We're behind. But Vermont's been doing better than a lot of places and has been proactive in a lot of places. So I think this is a really good step for us to take in terms of coordinating our efforts, making sure that we're bringing the legislature in so that we can do our job of providing oversight or being connected to oversight, which is difficult in this type of work. And that's it. I think that's it, Mr. Chair.
Representative Morgan.
Yes, hey, Representative Sibilia. I know I read this last night. I read it again just now, and I see you have the Adjutant General or designee on there.
Yes.
Obviously, we have the cyber.
Yes.
Would you see a collaboration there potentially?
Yes.
In any way, shape, or form?
Yes. And the secretary is here today, and I think they will speak to the existing, that there is an existing cyber security council in the state. The legislature has not been part of that. I'm not sure that we have a number of cybersecurity professionals that would have been able to contribute a lot. But again, this notion of how do we do our job? How do we help provide oversight and make sure that we're doing a good job in this? So this looks very closely like what that advisory council looks like right now. And yes, we know that the Guard has a lot of skill in this regard. Norwich University, I'm sure you'll hear from ADS about others.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Well, thanks for teeing things up.
Yeah, thank you.
You do have to be in committees.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We'll let our other witnesses keep telling the story. Thank you for being here. So I think we're going to hear from the secretary next. If you want to come and take the hot seat. Welcome back.
Thank you. Good morning. For the record, Sean Naylor, Secretary Digital Services. I appreciate the opportunity to come in here and talk about this important, what we feel is a very important piece of legislation. It was one that I teed up when we were in here maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, talking about some one-time funding appropriations where I teased you with the last slide about this. It's something we feel strongly about. And so thank you very much for taking it up. I know in what is the last week at a busy time for you. A couple of weeks ago, I don't have the exact date in front of me, the federal government, there is an agency, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA. So when I say CISA moving forward, that's who I'm talking about. Just issued an executive order. This is at the urging of the White House. The White House has been very focused on a number of direct calls with the governors associations and stuff like that about where we need to be moving, looking at securing our critical infrastructure. If we look at some of and these are more physical events, right? But things that took down the power grid in North Carolina and Washington State, we are just at risk from having someone be able to do that, have that same impact through a cyber event. And so there's been a real emphasis from the White House on this. And CISA issued an executive order stating that there should be some priorities moving forward. And interestingly, this bill, which was crafted prior to that executive order, ties in perfectly with it. It really anticipated what needs to happen next. And so in CISA's executive order, they really talk about some key areas. The first one is removing barriers to threat information sharing. So what does that mean? That's really talking about we don't have a means within the state of Vermont to be able to have a single entity receiving information about possible threats, actual threats, activities that are going on that would help Vermont as a state be able to identify things that are impactful that if they were only being dealt with in a single or a couple of different locations, that triangulation would never happen to note that there was something bigger afoot. So, we think about the event that took down the parcel storage management system that a number of municipalities across Vermont used back at Christmas time, right? And that took over many weeks to get restored. And, it was there could have been a lot worse times of the year, I guess, for that to happen. But that was something that we never became aware of until the articles started hitting the news outlets and everything else, where if there was some sort of council or formal reporting, and there was other things going on in, say, utility grid or water and wastewater infrastructure, there's an opportunity to help share that information and inform people, because the biggest thing that you need to do when one of these events happens is that situational awareness. You need to collect as much information as possible so you understand what's going on so that you can figure out how to address it. And when things are very, very siloed across the state, that's a risk for us. And so this really addresses that. Another thing is that they came out with was a focus on supply chain. So in the past, critical infrastructure would not have considered supply chain as part of critical infrastructure. But as we've realized, things like getting heating oil in the winter to Vermonters is an important thing. And we can't just plan for weather events and other types of more natural disasters, but what happens if something impacts the ability to deliver fuel oil across the Northeast? And how do we plan for that? How do we ensure that those people we're entrusting with that are doing due diligence in this space? So we don't only call it out, but we look to include as part of the council representation from that area to help inform us, so that, we don't want this to be something that is done in a vacuum where certain segments of critical infrastructure are not at the table participating in helping us figure out what the right standards are, what is a cadence for validating the standards. I see it's not in here, but I see like a maturing where we actually start to look at, tabletop exercises and then more serious exercises around how do we validate what we're planning for, our response is the right response, right? It's one thing to have a document that says that you pull off the shelf that says, okay, if this happens, you start here and you work kind of through the checklist. And it's another to build muscle memory. And I see this as the beginning of getting towards a place where we're doing that so that we can ensure people have that muscle memory for what is likely the inevitable going to happen to some critical area. And we would be better off to be prepared than responding without preparation. The last piece that this executive order really focused on was modernizing and implementing stronger security standards. And that's at the core of what this, the expectation for this council is to work with all those different critical infrastructure areas. And in some areas, we'll talk about the utility grid. Electric utilities have, through federal coordination, already have standards and practices. We may be, at most, all we need to do is initially to understand what those standards are and establish open lines of communications. But there are some areas that don't have any such standards. So how do we figure out a means to get everyone from a large water district that has to provide drinking water to 50,000, 70,000 Vermonters to ensure that they've got proper cybersecurity standards and practices in place and training, to a small, local, rural municipality that runs their own power company, right? And ensuring that they have access to, they're not going to have the resources to develop their own standards and best practices and stuff. So how can we, as a state, take a leading role through this council to work towards that? So that's a lot of what it was interesting, that CISA thing, executive order came out just a couple weeks ago, and I think it's a strong endorsement for what is outlined here as an important next step for the state of Vermont. We'll just briefly talk, about composition of the council. So the governor has a current council that was created when he came into office. So it's about, the executive order is probably close to 6 years old at this point. And that council is more advisory, no real, kind of capacity. It's just to the executive branch. But when we talk about the ability to, break down those barriers and share information, I think it's important for the council to have a broader composition and have more authority to build upon the work that they do to do things like a biannual review of the standards and practices that are in place in certain areas.
Would you see this new council sort of replacing that existing council on the CEO?
Yeah, that's served us to help get to the point we're at, where I think Representative Sibilia was very accurate in saying that, this is something that across the country people are chasing, but, through the focus of the administration and the partnership of the legislature, we've done well to not lose ground, right? And I think that's how I would characterize it is we've not gained ground, but we've not lost ground, right? And what we've been doing to date has helped us to keep to at least a certain standard and posture from a cyber perspective. That council helped us. This is the evolution of that, right? This is getting it to the next level. And I think what's going to it's going to take to help get Vermont to the next level.
Representative Hooper.
This is a little off subject, but I have to leave in a couple of minutes. Most of what I've interpreted you saying has been geared towards the malicious actor denial of service sort of crap.
That's the technical term.
I used to work for IBM. That was a joke too. But I've always been one of those people that feared that at some point in time, somebody in China is going to flip a switch, send a bar of code, and my refrigerator is going to start shooting ice cubes at me. What, if anything, are we doing in terms of the Trojan horse sort of mole? Every chip we get has the capacity to do something different.
There's a lot of tools, and I'd rather not speak to specific, right? Because that helps kind of share for the bad people the tools that we're using specifically. We are, I would say, with the investment we've made in the certain cybersecurity tools, at least for the executive branch, we're in good shape with that. We're constantly monitoring. We're checking I'm going to look at our CISO over there, 11,000, 12,000 devices daily to make sure that everything from their BIOS is current. If there is a update available to, monitoring for activity that looks out of the norm, right? That's a lot of times what we have the ability to do now is we know what information workers, what their normal day looks like, and what does something happen that doesn't look like the norm, and that can set off a red flag. So we have a lot of tools there, but that's for us, right? And I think what we're talking about is how do we leverage the work and the knowledge and what we've gained to help other critical areas in Vermont, understand the value of doing a similar thing, right? And so how do we bring some of our experience and learn from some of them so that we can raise everybody's level of cyber position? And that's what it's part of, what you're talking about is how do we know that Velco, right, is monitoring for the same things?
Yeah. Thanks.
It appears to me when you're talking about the council composition, most of the folks who would be on here are folks who hold office or would be on as part of their professional job. Do you have any sense of the kind of budget impact? It doesn't seem like there would be many per diems or really much that would change.
No, we don't anticipate whatever it is will be negligible and covered out of ADS's administrative support to the council. And as we were talking earlier, it's, we're not only, adding representatives from the House and the Senate, right? Those different critical infrastructure areas, including hospitals, including critical supply chain, thinking past just internet, electric utilities, water, wastewater infrastructure, but looking at those other areas that are still critical to us on a day-to-day basis and getting them represented and participating in this.
Questions for the secretary? Did you want to have members of your team come up with you and give specific testimony, or were they?
They were here for emotional support for me today.
Excellent. Just want to make sure I'm making space and time.
No, so thank you. With me today, it was an opportunity, and I'm not sure he's been in front of the group. Scott Carby is our Chief Information Security Officer, right? So I want him here in case there was some specific questions, but I was prepared to kind of at least speak to the language today and stuff. Trying to look through my notes and see if there's anything we haven't touched on.
It looks like a lot of thought has gone into, including folks from the critical infrastructure that, organizations, everybody from healthcare, utilities, et cetera. One thing that we've been doing historically here whenever we set up a new council or board is to put us on a couple years out so that we have the ability to sort of say, is this the right composition? Is this board still meeting, et cetera? And so I just wanted to sort of flag that I think if we do move this quickly before crossover, I would want to add a sunset out, 2 or 3 years. The next bill we're talking about is really about the future of sunset advisory, government accountability, and the recommendations of our sunset advisory commission to date. So I just wanted to flag that and see, if we put something out that was like 2026 or 2027, if you had any heartburn.
I don't. When we look at this landscape, it is changing every day. So having a means that keeping this conversation going will be, I think, and if that's what it is, a sunset, and that way we're assured of some sort of cadence of revisiting it, that makes perfect sense, because maybe we'll be dealing with different threats and we'll want to take a different approach at that time. One thing I would like to, I guess it may seem small, but I think it's really important, and that is on page 4 of the bill, line 14. None of this will matter if it's done in a vacuum. I kind of referred to a vacuum earlier, but the idea of establishing a unified cybersecurity communications and response plan, I think, is tremendous, right? That communications, right? Ensuring that we have a secure means by which to share this information, and we're not creating yet another vulnerability, right? By aggregating all of this information into like single locations, but a thoughtful means of having all these folks, regardless of whether they're private sector, government, nonprofits, but whatever they play a role in, have a way of securely communicating when something is going sideways, is a tremendous goal to have. And I think, it deserves, I want to at least give it attention more than just a single line in here, because that is going to be an important outcome.
Representative Chase.
To that point, one of the things that CISA lists for a lot of their employees is security clearance. Do you envision a need or requirement for the members of this committee to have any sort of security clearance in order to serve?
Not initially, but I think that's one of the things that will come out of the initial standards work, is to identify, is there standards in place in their industry and they're meeting some sort of clearance requirement there? And if not, how do we do that? And then do we apply, and is it an opportunity to lead by example? I think that the reason I'm hesitant to say out of the gate is that if we have a representative from critical supply chain as a small operator in the heating oil business, is that something that is going to be like a standard practice for them? Or is that something that we should evaluate as part of the council, and then maybe as part of the review with the sunset, does that get codified at that point? Okay.
Great. I wanted to flag, I just caught for Legislative Council, I know Becky's here. Thanks for joining us too. I think there's a reference to the Green Mountain Board and the healthcare section in here.
There is.
It's the Green Mountain Care Board, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Just left out the word care.
Nice catch.
Yeah. Sorry. So yeah, there's references, I think, to the Public Utility Commission for the utility space, and the Green Mountain Care Board in the healthcare space as being existing boards that have a statutory obligation for managing those critical infrastructure areas, and will likely play a role. But what it also draws attention to is we don't have anyone overseeing a lot of the other ones, right? We don't have a comparable for things like internet. So, how does that get addressed long term? And I think that's one of the things that the council would be wanting to address.
Any other questions for the secretary? All right. So committee, we have been moving very efficiently the last couple of days. Since we're doing a boards and commissions bill, I thought it would be good to at least take testimony on this today. But as I've been thinking about our work and what we've been doing, I'm more inclined to, if the committee agrees with me, to think about moving this either later today or tomorrow on its own. So once we have a whole committee together, does anybody have any concerns about maybe taking the day to just look at the composition and let it sit? It seems like it was pretty well thought out. I'm going to take a couple more reads through it, but I think we could even come back to it later today, potentially, unless anybody has any concerns about that.
I think this totally has merit. We should.
Yeah, I read it a couple of times last night. I think it's solid.
Representative Hankin.
Thank you. Just a, okay, I do see it on here. No, I don't. Just kind of a point of operation or process. Should we warn it ahead of time that we're going to vote on it?
Yeah, I'll definitely put it on the agenda. I typically, I think anything, especially if there's going to be any sort of controversy, always put possible markup and vote like 24 hours in advance. I think on this one, if it's okay with the committee, that's why I'm sort of asking you all about your thoughts on it. But if we put on the agenda for the end of the day today, for instance, that we might pick this back up for a possible markup and vote, is that sufficient, or should we wait until tomorrow?
I've always felt 24-hour notice is appropriate for the public who is looking at our agenda and may not keep referring back to it. But I learned that is not policy, that's just common courtesy.
Yeah, it's especially when we're with a bill like this where there's not a lot of budget impact, and it's not a specific policy impact in and of itself. We're looking for the council to pull people together and make recommendations. I'm willing. I feel better about being more flexible about that, but I also just wanted to check in with you all to see if anybody had any heartburn about moving.
It's like sort of building upon a thing.
Yeah.
Right. So we're not creating a new thing that should say we're, in essence, yes, we are, but we're building a more robust infrastructure to it.
So
I'm okay with it with this bill. I just wouldn't want to do it too frequently like that.
I completely agree.
Yes.
And it's been our practice to make sure we put possible markup or vote on the agenda well in advance. So in light of that, I'm wondering if Rebecca, if you would be willing to add a sunset for, let's say, 3 years out, if that works for the committee. And then if there's any drafting stuff like adding care to Green Mountain Care Board, and maybe we could take a look at an updated draft this afternoon.
Sounds good.
Can that work? Okay, great. Well,
You want to talk this away from like Green Mountain Care Board?
yeah, I think if we invited everyone who's listed here,
That would be a lot.
it'd be a lot. So the quorum for the board is a majority of the board. And I think just given the fact that it's right before crossover, if any particular organization feels like it would be a burden for them to send somebody, they could take it up with the Senate, but I doubt that would happen in this particular case. It seems like things are thought through. I don't know if anybody else has thoughts about that.
Well, for the secretary, is there anybody on this list that you would expect to be surprised by being on this list?
No, I mean, we've talked about this with the Green Mountain Care Board. We've talked about it with the Public Utilities Commission. The existing membership, many of it is already what was on the governor's council. So the additional ones of a couple of critical infrastructure areas, we don't know who they are, right? So that would be a process to identify and stuff. So we've not reached out, but those that are within our area of like working with, we've kind of vetted it to make sure that there was support.
The idea here being like, for instance, the governor would find a representative from a municipal water system. So they might, the public works director in the city of St. Albans might be asked to serve or something like that.
Yeah, so we've not, because there's not like, that we're aware of, this is where I was getting to with like the PUC and the Green Mountain Care Board. There's like central boards we could go to and commissions to kind of like vet this and make sure that there was not going to be a concern. But for some of those other areas that don't have oversight, they may have questions about it, but we've not been able to like vet it because there's not a central group to go to at this point. Thank you very much for the attention today. Thank you for getting in. I am right across the street. If you have questions, I would be glad to come back at any point over the next couple of days. And I really appreciate Representative Sebelia's and Chase sponsorship of this, because I think it is an important next step on our cybersecurity journey. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary Naylor. Any final comments on the cybersecurity bill from the committee? We'll circle back to this later on this afternoon. I don't think that'll be a super long conversation. I know we're packing a lot in this week. Great. Well, so we're now going to take up our boards and commissions bill, H125. And I see we have a number of distinguished guests with us today. Very happy to welcome the former Vice Chair of House Government Operations and our friend former Representative John Gannon. So John, thanks for zooming in with us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
For the committee, we've got H125. We're still working off the as introduced, but we also have the proposed amendment to add the summer study committee to look at both the Sunset Advisory Council, the government accountability, per diem review that we had discussed a couple weeks ago before the break. So both of those elements are up on our committee page, along with an updated summary of the whole enchilada from Tim. So Tim, thanks for putting that together to guide us. So John, thanks for being with us. I was hoping that you might be able to tell the committee, since we have 3 new members of the committee, plus a number of us who haven't been on government operations before. That's about 2/3 of the committee in total that hasn't done any Gov.Ops before. What was the sort of history of the Sunset Advisory Committee and your role and sort of the philosophy and history of that, and how does this bill kind of has it come together, and also if you have an opinion about what the future of it should look like, I think that's very relevant to our work today.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Representative McCarthy. For the record, my name's John Gannon, former state representative and former co-chair of the Sunset Advisory Commission. The Sunset Advisory Commission was created by 2018 Special Session Act number 2 to create the Sunset Advisory Commission to make recommendations regarding the state's boards and commissions, including their necessity, their powers and duties, and the per diem compensation of their members. The commission was comprised of 6 members, 2 representatives, 2 senators, and 2 gubernatorial appointees. Act 2 also required the Secretary of State to maintain and make available on her website an inventory of state boards and commissions. Prior to the passage of Act 2, there was no official inventory of boards and commissions. The only detailed inventory was kept by a former state employee, Otto Trouts, on his own volition. It was not even known at that time exactly how many boards and commissions there were in the state of Vermont. Unlike many other states, there was no formal review of boards and commissions by the legislature. Once they were set up, and that was the last that was typically heard from them, unless they had a sunset provision, which when the Sunset Advisory Commission was initially set up was very rare. Members of most boards and commissions were entitled by statute to receive a per diem or other compensation. The Vermont Commission on Women and a handful of other boards and commissions were actually prohibited from receiving any per diem compensation. The commission began its work during adjournment 2018 and made recommendations that resulted in 2019 Act number 61. The commission continued doing its work in adjournment 2019 and made the recommendation set forth in 2020 Act number 128. During adjournment 2020, the commission made further recommendations set forth in 2021 Act 52. And then in adjournment 2021, the commission met again and made recommendations set forth in 2022 Act number 134. And most recently, the commission met in adjournment 2022 and made the recommendations, many of the recommendations contained in the bill before you, which is H125. As a result of this legislation, 35 boards and commissions have been repealed or are proposed to be repealed. 4 boards and commissions were merged into 2, and several boards and commissions statutory language was revised. While this was good progress, as the updated spreadsheet shows, the legislature added 10 new boards and commissions during the 2022 legislative session. More work needs to be done in this area. Consolidating certain boards and commissions may be one way to reduce the number of boards and commissions that exist. That is something that the Sunset Advisory Commission really didn't focus on. Our main goal was to repeal boards and commissions, but I think consolidation is another way to tackle this problem. For example, do we really need the Vermont Milk Commission, the Vermont Dairy Promotion Council, and the Task Force to revitalize the Vermont dairy industry, all of which deal with promoting the Vermont milk industry? Or do we need 2 state rehabilitation councils in a state of our size, one for the blind and visually impaired and one for vocational rehabilitation, when the federal statute, which requires these councils, permits but does not require separate councils? I think that's an area that should be pursued by the legislature. In addition, Act 134 amended 32 VSA Section 1010. That statute set per diems for boards and commissions. For well over a decade, the per diem for most boards and commissions was set at $50. Now, Act 134 creates a process for the governor to request increased per diem compensation. I think members of the commission felt that by allowing the governor to increase per diem compensation for some boards and commissions, that it would increase the diversity of membership, which I think is very important, help fill difficult to fill boards and commissions, and reward members of boards and commissions that have significant workloads. I also think that having the House and Senate Appropriations Committees reviewing per diems will bring more attention to boards and commissions and add another layer of review beyond this committee's review of many boards and commissions. Thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to take any questions with respect to the Sunset Advisory Commission.
So, John, one of the things that I think there's a lot of very meta stuff in this bill, and what I mean by that is one of the things that we do is we see that the Sunset Advisory Commission itself sunsets.
Yes.
There's also the repeal of the Government Accountability Committee, and we heard testimony from Representatives Brumstead and Dolan about how the composition and the scope of that particular committee's work seemed to have kind of run out of gas, is how I would describe it, that it wasn't an effective way for us to really hold ourselves to metrics and standards of accountability. And what we realized was how difficult it is for us while we're dealing with the churn of policy bills and the sort of emergent things that come up in the haste of the legislative session to take a look back at all of the boards and commissions, to really look at things holistically, and for us to develop in real time some of those efforts. So this idea that's in the amendment that's also we put on the table here is the idea of having 4 House members and 4 senators meet together for a summer government accountability committee to look at many of the issues that you brought up. So what are appropriate per diems? Where can consolidation happen? What should the future of reviewing sunsets and repeals be? And how do we hold ourselves accountable and really measure the work that we've done over time? But what do you think about that approach of sort of having an interim GAC to tell us what to do in the next legislative session?
I think that's an excellent idea. As you said, Representative McCarthy, I mean, during the legislative session, it's very difficult to tackle all the boards and commissions that exist and get a really a good idea on it. So doing something during the adjournment with a committee that's dedicated to looking at those issues, I think is really important, especially I think focusing on consolidation. As I said, the Sunset Advisory Commission didn't really focus on mergers, but I really think that's another way to tackle this effort, which will, I think, have more, will be more appealing to other policy committees within the House and Senate, because as you probably know, it's very difficult to convince a policy committee to eliminate a board and commission that they set up even if it is not functioning as it should be.
Representative Maruki.
Good morning, John.
Good morning, Mike.
Are you on the East Coast or out west?
I am in Wyoming.
Yeah. So you're up pretty early this morning, so thank you for that.
Oh, no problem.
I know you did a lot of work on this, and we don't want to have to reinvent the wheel. And you mentioned consolidations. Was there any kind of list generated of suggestions for consolidations?
The Sunset Advisory Commission did not do that. I mean,
Yeah.
as I said, we were mostly focused on repealing boards and commissions. And, to be honest, I think of the 35 boards and commissions that were either repealed or are proposed to be repealed, that was sort of the low-hanging fruit, so to speak. Many of those were boards and commissions that were not meeting, that agencies had lost track of. It was very difficult when we recommended a board and commission be eliminated that was still very active, to get the policy committee to sign off on that recommendation. To give you one example, we did recommend that what is it? Well, forget that. But it was very difficult to get policy committees to sign off on repeals. That's why I think consolidation may be a better solution.
Yeah. Well, just a comment. If you're interested in really having some fun, Representative Higley is going to be reporting the technical corrections bill. And I think it's over 200 pages again this year. So he may threaten us to read the whole thing into the record. So,
well, I'm confident that Representative Higley will do an excellent job in reporting that bill.
Thank you. Good to see you, John.
Good to see you.
Any other questions for the person who probably has the biggest wealth of institutional knowledge that we miss on boards and commissions and sunset issue? I got to say, John, yesterday we passed a cannabis bill that had a number of different policy that I know you worked on at length over the year, just making course corrections and tweaks. And I was missing you greatly yesterday in the conversation.
Well, I miss being there, and I really do appreciate the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you so much. And I really hope that if we do set up this summer committee, that we might tap your wealth of knowledge and history and for recommendations about things like consolidating and get you in again.
I'd be happy to help in any way I can.
Great. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
All right. So there are several people who've asked to testify about different elements of this bill. And the first that I'd like to welcome is Rich, who we had talked to a little bit about our Native Affairs Committee. So our commission, excuse me. So Rich, thank you so much for joining us this morning and for the great conversation before the break.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members of the committee. I'd like to introduce myself for the record in the language of this place. Kwa Mziwi, Indelewizi, Lisal, Tenda Iwantastigak, Telisukwakik, Uliwani, Kididam, Uliwani, Utsi, Pamgisagak. My name is Rich. I'm called Rich Holshoe. I live down the river in Wantastagok, which you know as Brattleboro today, way down in the Banana Belt. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to you. I serve as chair of the Vermont Commission on Native American Affairs. The commission is a 9-member body that was convened by legislation in 2010, so 13 years ago. Since then, the scope of our oversight has evolved, has changed, has grown, and the enabling statute, as it was drafted in 2010, has stayed the same. our previous witness, Mr. Gannon, testified amply to the fact that many of these things were set in motion and then they've stood ever since and not been addressed. I'm here to speak to the Vermont Commission on Native American Affairs as a case study in that situation. And your bill, H-125, which is 140 pages long. We're not going to get into the weeds on that, but I'll just offer you my experience relative to being on a board and how that's been going so that you can take that into your consideration. Many of the points that I'm going to bring up here are addressed in another bill, H-260, which was introduced by Representative Catherine Sims as prime sponsor with many others, and is in House General right now and staying there for the moment due to the crush of time and other bills. So if you wanted to, you could take a peek at H-260. That is a bill to directly address the situation with the Vermont Commission on Native American Affairs and how we got here and where we see ourselves going and what it would take to address that in a better manner, because it's been getting more difficult. Part of the challenges that we have as a 9-member board is, first of all, finding members. They're appointed by the governor, by application, by recommendation, by the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, through the Department of Historic Preservation, which is our direct oversight. Folks are having a hard time stepping forward to fill these roles because there is basically very little compensation. Most of these people are drawn from less than flush economic circumstances. And so time and travel is a severe constraint. And most folks will simply say, I can't, I just can't. They'd like to, but they can't. So per diem or other compensation is a huge part of this. We're still at the rate that was set in, what was it, 1986 or something like that? $50. It's a long time ago. That needs to be addressed. And I think that's the case with most boards and commissions. Whereas many of the boards and commissions you're looking at will be sunset or should be sunset or merged. Our commission, our responsibilities have grown over that time period of 13 years. We are now tasked with seating or recommending for seating representatives to 6 to 8 other commissions that have been created. And so outside of our own meetings, which have moved from the original minimum of 3 times a year, we now meet 9 times a year. It's turning into a full-time job. As chair, it is functionally about a half-time job for me now. That is not compensated. I'm able to do this through the basically subsidy of the nonprofit that I started 2.5 years ago to work in service to the Native communities. I find my own funding, and I'm able to take the role of chair on because I get paid through the nonprofit, but I'm doing this for the community. I'm not saying that I need to be compensated as chair, but in order for the commission, the people that I work with, my community to work, we need to recognize what they're putting in. So we're serving on all of these other advisory boards and commissions and councils, such as the Environmental Justice Advisory Council, Interagency, Racial Statistics Advisory Council, Equity in Education, any number of others. So it's grown. The enabling legislation hasn't kept up. We need staffing support. The agency provides staff support in the person of Jess Robinson with Department of Historic Preservation, who attends every meeting and fields communications that come in through the government website portal. He's already overwhelmed with the responsibilities of his regular job as state archaeologist. And we could use some support here. There's a lot of back and forth. If you're following the political climate right now, there's especially a lot of back and forth. It's all political. And since the commission serves as the liaison body between the communities on the ground, on the land, so to speak, because we're speaking about indigenous people, and the state government, which is, the administrative body over everyone in every part of this continent, wherever you are. We have what we call a colonial government nowadays. And we need to find a way to get along, a way to work this out, a way to find a path into the future. So we appreciate the increased support and attention coming from the public, from the legislature. This is awesome. We're trying to keep up. And for that to be recognized in the way that boards and commissions are supported would be critical. So per diem, staffing, things of that nature. We're one of those boards that does not sunset, does not need to sunset. We're growing. We're grateful for the opportunity, and we'd like to continue in a good way. So that's my basic explanation to you. I'd be happy to take questions from members of the committee, from the chair.
I think our member who hails from closest to you, I will not use the pejorative term for the southern part of our state that you did, but Representative Mrowicki wanted to weigh in.
Good morning, Rich. How are you doing?
I'm great. Nwolonzi Tagiahatsi. How are you?
I'm well. And good to see you, even from far away. I appreciate the concerns around per diems, and first of all, that it hasn't kept up. Do you have an amount you could suggest to us that would seem fair?
Well, I can, in the moment, out of H260, which I referred to earlier, introduced by Representative Sims, specifically for the Commission on Native American Affairs, the suggestion is made in there to raise the 50 to 100 with I think a cap of 1,000 per member, which would be 10 meetings, basically. We're meeting 9 already, and occasionally we'll have an extra. And then staffing support would be helpful as well. But that's just an off the cuff acknowledgement that times have changed since '86.
Yeah, thank you. And that's a good starting point, and it certainly seems fair. And I think we recognize too that the work of the meetings is not just showing up on that day, but there's usually a lot of work before and after those meetings. So I think we need to make sure we take that into consideration as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I see someone else there.
Representative Chase.
Representative Chase, thanks.
With regards to sunsets, one of the things that I heard earlier this morning was by putting in a sunset, it forces a legislative check back to renew and make any updates. Do you feel that would be helpful to yours to put in a sunset, not to end it, but to force a legislative check back more recently than, the past decade or however long it's been since the last update was made or since it was enacted?
I think the the mention made earlier of an amendment for an over the summer board to look at all of these things would be a good place for that to happen.
Okay.
Rather than a sunset per se.
Representative Byron.
No, thank you for coming in. I'm also a sponsor of H260, so I understand the issues you're bringing to us. We've heard it from other participants in these structures before. And just to your point, just basic math, right? Like even $100 on what would be presumed to be an 8-hour shift, we'll call it, is still $12.50 an hour, which is below our state's minimum wage. So I would just like to point that out to the group.
That's a good yardstick to look at. it is a big commitment for some more than others. By the time we get in the car, go all the way to Montpelier, have a 3-hour meeting, drive all the way home, you've used the day up. Yep.
Representative Higley.
No, and just on that point, looking at it from a little different angle, whether it's myself as a legislator, select board members, school board members, you name it, there's not enough compensation that could actually contribute to how much time a lot of these folks put in. So I think it's important to understand that as well, that it's quite a community service. It is a burden and on a lot of folks, but I'd hate to see it get too far out of hand as to how much compensation for all these boards and commissions. And that's why I think it was important that there was a provision to, allow the governor to look at this and find out which ones maybe did require a little bit more time and service to complete their mission.
Representative Hanko.
Thank you. As a longtime public servant on many boards and committees that are not compensated and some that have very little compensation, I just want to comment on the recent pandemic and bringing about digital communication. I find that even though it is not ideal, Zoom has really helped me cut down on my travel time. My district is about 2 hours from here, and I would spend many hours driving back and forth to attend meetings from Montpelier back to my home district if it weren't for Zoom. So I'm pretty grateful that we have that option, particularly in the cases where we don't get compensated for being on those committees and boards.
I really appreciate Chair Holshoe, you putting the human face on, one of the leaders in one of our many boards and commissions. And the conversation we're having here in response to your testimony is really indicative of that there's a spectrum of the amount of kind of work and the flavor that our councils, boards, and commissions that we've established have. Some of them are, require many hours of preparation, and they're quasi-judicial. You're discussing the hours of, work handling difficult political responses to, public and out of state criticism of state policy, I think is what you're referring to. And so I'm really supportive of us engaging in a process to figure out which boards and commissions are, doing a small public service that doesn't need a lot of prep and are weighing in a way that's kind of a small time commitment versus which of our councils, boards, and commissions have, significant prep time, really are requiring a level of professionalism and time commitment. And I think the memo that we received from the administration, to Representative Higley's point, was that the report we asked them to do was that, yeah, they do want us to figure out the per diems are based on the actual work involved in the in that service, as opposed to, a specific flat rate that everybody gets. So to inform that, I think we're going to need to have a more thorough conversation. And I hope that we can do that over the summer and come back and take some more action on this next year.
Thank you, Chair McCarthy. I would like to make myself available to help inform that if needed. I appreciate that folks are cognizant of the fact that some boards are becoming busier and others are not. And the lay of the land in those requirements as they evolve. They may not have been what they were thought to be originally. But I appreciate your time. Thank you very much, committee and chair. And I look forward to working with you more. Good luck with 140 pages.
Thanks so much. All right. So on a different topic that is in this very large and expansive bill, I'd like to invite David Englander to take the hot seat and tell us a little bit about an issue that had popped up that happens to be in our bills. So thanks for being with us today.
I'm delighted to be with you. For the record, my name is David Englander. I'm the Senior Policy and Legal Advisor to the Department of Health, and I'm here to answer your questions.
I think that you had flagged, this was a couple of weeks ago, so I'm trying to bring myself up and get back to the emails, but Representative Brum said, it said there was on the Board of Health sections, we wanted to know with the repeal of Board of Health, that's a pretty meaty part of this bill, how those duties are carried out, if you could give any context on that. And then there was a specific issue about the benchmark unlawful dosage language that I wanted to make sure if we needed to address it, that we would do that before we move this bill out.
Terrific. So the Board of Health, the existence of the Board of Health actually predates the existence of the Commissioner of Health. So as the structure of the department changed, almost all of the responsibilities of the board were transferred to the commissioner. And at this point, the Board of Health has a very small number of ministerial duties, which include things like approving a small subset of permits, of licenses, and they act as an appellate board for decisions, action decisions made by the Commissioner of Health. The complexity is that at this point, it's not clear what value it is to the people of Vermont to have the Board of Health. It tends to be somewhat burdensome in order for board members to appear. The appeals are very rare. In the past 5 years, we've had 2 appeals, only one of which has gone to a hearing. It's been very because the number of duties asked of board members, and we're incredibly grateful for their volunteering. It tends not to be a very meaty role, so it's hard to keep people on the board because they find that they have better things to do with their time. So we propose that we eliminate the board. By the way, this was the recommendation of the previous chair of the board, and actually, the current chair also agrees that the board could be eliminated. It'll be much more efficient to have the decisions, and I mean like permitting decisions made by the department itself, as we do in every other aspect of the department's work, and this is consistent with the way other state agencies work. At this point. So I'll stop there.
So on the idea of repealing the Board of Health, any questions for Mr. Englander about those pieces? Representative Waters Evans.
Thank you. So should there be an appeal, because you said there were a couple, what process would take that process's place?
Thank you. So what we propose is that appeals be made to the Superior Court of Washington in Washington District. And we've spoken with the judiciary on this, and they know that we've asked for this and understand that we've had this like one hearing in 5 years.
And this was the recommendation of the Sunset Advisory Committee. This isn't new to the bill. This is part of the overall process. So Representative Roki and then Representative Hingham.
Sure, just I'm hearing the recommendation. I'm also aware of the backlog on the dockets across the judiciary right now. While that suggestion may make sense once that backlog is addressed, I suggest maybe we want to hold off until we have some clarity on that. Or else we're just having decisions being put adding to the queue.
What types of appeals are we talking about? Are they, and how frequently do they happen?
So I'm saying, so there have been 2 in 5 years, okay, and one of which was settled before it went to a hearing. The one that went to a hearing was a vendor who had, I want to be careful about how I say this. There was a licensee who was repeatedly found in violation of their food selling license, and we conditioned that license, and that person appealed that decision. So they do tend to be, when they happen, again, very rarely, they tend to be fairly straightforward. I should say it is a significant burden on the department to arrange Board of Health meetings. It's very complicated to get everybody in the same room at the same time, even over Zoom. So it's not to have the board continue to exist is no cost to the department in terms of resources.
And I am building on, I think, the culture that came out of the desire to have the Sunset Advisory Committee back in 2018, and the work that we did the last couple of years in Gov.Ops with sunsets and repeals, I want us to move cautiously, but I think we as a Gov.Ops committee have kind of a bias toward repeal that's meant to balance out or the kind of policy committee or the sort of inertia of just kind of keeping boards going for the sake of boards and councils going. So I wrestle with that. There's always the hesitancy, and I want to validate it to sort of repeal a board or to pull back a mechanism. But that's part of how we have so many boards that rarely ever meet and don't have the big function. So that's a big part of what this bill is all about, is to make sure that we have the boards and councils and commissions that we need and not just keep them open just in case unnecessarily. So this is a perfect example of exactly the kind of conversation that keeps us perpetuating boards that the once in 5 years where there's actually a hearing might not be the most efficient way to move forward. Questions, Representative Hango, sorry, we got off on a tangent.
And would the Department of Health then approve this small subset of licensees? And I assume they also enforce, so the Board of Health wasn't the enforcer?
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions about the repeal of the board piece?
I can speak to the benchmark unlawful dose piece as well.
Yeah.
So this is a change from as proposed. The department has a responsibility for what's called the regulated drug rule, and the purpose of that rule, the function that it plays is that it allows the Department of Health to adopt by rule a substance that is harmful to the public health. And typically it's some of those things are Schedule I narcotics. Some things are things that have not yet been scheduled, but that are harmful to the public health, and that the wheels of the FDA and Congress have not yet, have not moved with alacrity to prohibit. So a good example of that is bath salts. Bath salts came on the market by almost 10 years ago, and the department made them illegal within days because they could be sold at convenience stores, and they were extremely dangerous. Another part of that rule establishes what are called benchmark unlawful doses, and the purpose of the benchmark is it allows prosecutors to seek additional penalties for certain amounts. So a benchmark unlawful dose could be let me pause. The benchmark unlawful dose is a theoretical outer limit from what a prescriber might prescribe for a given day. So 10 milligrams of bad stuff. You have a better idea than bad stuff. Good fake name. 10 milligrams of bad, 10 milligrams of spliff.
That's not what I said, but.
I'm sorry. What did you say?
Spice from.
Oh,
Dune.
spice. Oh, from Dune. Thank you. Of course.
Yeah, I know, what's going on here?
Let's start with the House of Atreides.
That was a great committee.
Fellow sci-fi nerds among us. Are you familiar with the okay? So context. Hebert. This is like really famous, like 70s. That novel came out. Science fiction. Like really, like if you're into science fiction, the Dune is like it's part of the canon. Yeah. But anyway,
we'll talk about the Bene Gesserit tomorrow. So the purpose of the benchmark, a benchmark unlawful dose is a theoretical outer bound of what a physician might prescribe. So it's 10 milligrams of spice, and what that allows prosecutors to do is if somebody is in possession of 100 times, 1,000 times, or 10,000 times that benchmark, they can seek additional penalties against a defendant. We originally proposed that functionality be moved to FDA. When the FDA approves a drug, there is a benchmark dose that is contained in the approval materials, but we have since heard from prosecutors they're not exactly sure how that would work. So what the department is proposing is that rather than that functionality be moved to FDA, that functionality, like the other pieces of this bill, be moved into the department.
So, Representative Henko, and we're talking about, this is on page 64 of the bill right now, but it's just trying to figure out exactly how it's structured before we start talking about the thing itself.
So my question is then that varies state by state, and some states may have that penalty and others may not, that capability for additional penalty. Whereas if it were administered by the FDA, it would be uniform throughout the United States.
It's somewhat apples and oranges. The issue is that there are substances that don't have unlawful, they don't have benchmark doses, for instance, because they're not approved for human use. So xylazine is an excellent example where FDA wouldn't establish because most of us aren't horses. Whereas the rule would allow the Department of Health to establish a benchmark on awful dose. We'll have to figure out how we would do that, but it would give a tool for prosecutors to seek additional penalties on things for which there is not an established benchmark dose.
What about commonly used human ingestion drugs, like for instance, heroin or fentanyl?
So those are, in the strange way that regulations and rules interact, there is, I think the penalties for heroin are established solely by statute, and that there's a benchmark unlawful dose for fentanyl.
Too confusing, too many hands in the pot, in the cooking pot.
To be clear, we inherited this.
Gov.Ops.
we inherited this structure
From
statute.
From
Vermont statute, not US.
Right.
I mean, I think that's where my confusion lies, is why there is not a federal benchmark if it's a harmful drug.
So based on your testimony, the specific concern is about substances where the federal government there's so much chemistry going on. There are so many chemicals of concern that suddenly we learn that people are using these bath salts, and we want to act quickly to say this is not something that we want, that this actually, the interplay here is that you're asking for the ability to have more flexibility at the Vermont level without needing the federal government to act.
To be clear, we're not asking it already exists. We just move the functionality from the board to us.
Okay. So,
we're not seeking any additional authority.
Yeah.
Okay, I understand that. I also understand bath salts. I just don't understand why there aren't federal benchmarks for other known drugs. The bath salt thing just came about because somebody discovered that it was a thing. Other than taking a bath.
Representative Bauer.
I think to maybe help clarify this. So on a sort of a chemistry molecular level, a lot of these things are very specifically defined as these illegal illicit compounds. You tweak a little bit of the molecular structure, all of a sudden it's not that,
right?
But equally as dangerous. Methamphetamine and MDMA, ecstasy are sort of in that group where you can just tweak it a little bit, and then all of a sudden it's legal. Hey, bath salts. So the rules can move much faster than legislation to catch that.
I get the bath salts.
Well, I mean,
the list is actually highly technical, right? I wouldn't even try and read them because we're talking about molecules.
And that's what I'm saying. Yeah,
exactly.
Chemistry level.
Exactly.
It's when a chemist, like a nefarious chemist, just kind of bad drug, not illegal. Yeah.
Representative Hank.
So you said this was on page 64.
So at the top of page 64, what's in our bill today, and so Mr. Englander is suggesting that we amend the bill to on this section. So I'll direct everybody's attention to lines 2 to 4, page 64 of H125 as introduced. So we have a definition here of benchmark unlawful dosage, which means the maximum recommended therapeutic dose or maximum daily dose as determined during clinical trials and approved by the Federal Food and Drug Administration. I believe it's the department's desire that we update that, that says as determined by the department by rule instead of clinical trial by FDA.
That's correct.
So does the committee in our next draft of H125 have any concern about taking the department's recommendation and giving them that? Sounds good. Okay. So Tim, our legislative counsel's with us via Zoom here. So we'll add that as one of the tweaks for the next draft. Great, thank you. All right, any other questions about Board of Health or this piece for Mr. Englander?
Or any of the other boards that we made recommendations on, perhaps?
Yeah, are there any other pieces of the bill you'd like us to sort of be aware of? Or I think the fact that there was the repeal of the Board of Health was the one that really stuck out to me as one that I think we needed some testimony on. But if there are other pieces we should be thinking about, or if the committee has any questions about the rationale.
Are there any more you'd like to take on since you're going to leave this one on the?
We have plenty. Okay. I mean, if you have any suggestions, I'm happy to talk. I don't think so. I think there were a number of appeals that we sought in part because they either no longer existed or they've been subsumed by larger counties. I will say that there's going to be, other than the elimination of the Board of Health, there won't, our recommendations accepted by the commission won't change any functions within the department. There's no loss of function within the department. And the Board of Health elimination will be a huge boon to us in terms of efficiency.
There was, so some of these, like the repeal of the Coalition for Healthy Activity, I think some of those either were consolidations or things that were inactive.
Right.
So none of those, especially looking back to the Sunset Advisory Commission's notes, were any red flags for me. It sounded like many of those kind of health-related advisory councils had kind of ceased to have a function. But does the committee have any other concerns about those before we let Mr. Englander go? Thank you so much for so much. All right. We are a little bit ahead of where I thought we would be at this point, which I think is great. So what I think I'd like to do,
Mr. Swanson?
Yeah, we heard, so I just want to make sure we're on track. So Mr. Swanson, thank you for being with us. I think you are the last person that was on my list to testify. And so we'll talk about the Clean Energy Development Fund, and then we'll take a break, and maybe a little bit of a longer break than I had scheduled, so that Tim has a chance to potentially make those couple of tweaks. So Mr. Swanson, do you want to take the witness chair, please? Thank you. And if you would introduce yourself for the record and tell us a little bit about the new developments in clean energy.
Yeah, I am Sam Swanson. I've served as chair. I've served as a member of the board of the Clean Energy Development Board, and I'm here to present a recommendation of the Clean Energy Development Board regarding a tweak, what I would call a tweak, to your handling of the future of the Clean Energy Development Board in light of changing circumstances. I've been with the board since 2009, but I qualify, and I've served different roles. I've been a member, I've been co-chair, and now I'm chair. And over that time, I'm reflecting on the conversation here today. I've learned quite a bit about what you're up to. It informs me that the history of the board, which really is not the board, it was first an advisory committee, then a board, and now a different board. So when I joined in 2009, it was an advisory committee, worked in the department with, again, a diverse group of people advising the department in those days. Then they got a lot of money with the financial crisis money. We had like $30 million to allocate, and we became an independent board, and the board actually made decisions monthly on allocations of a lot of money. And then as that money spent out and conditions changed, the board was reconstituted again and now serves as an independent advisory board to the Public Service Department. And in a sense, it speaks to your goal of having sunsets. I think it's healthy. And in fact, 6 months ago, we were discussing ourselves, should we continue to exist? Because the funding for the Clean Energy Development Board, Clean Energy Development Fund, which we serve as an independent advisor or oversight role, was basically being spent out. Those funds were being spent out. Our recommendation to this board is simply, because of some important changed circumstances, to change the sunset date that you've proposed, or that the bill proposes, of June 2025. That date was set in hearings with the Sunset Commission because at that point it was clear the money that remained in the Clean Energy Development Fund would either be completely spent or certainly committed in contracts, and there would really be little for the board, nothing for the board really to do other than to sit and observe how the money was being spent. What's important and what the reason why the board just a couple of weeks ago asked me to communicate with the legislature on the sunset is that there a few years ago, about 2015, 2016, the Public Service Board, then the Public Service Board, now the Public Service Commission, Public Utilities Commission, gave a CPG, Certificate of Public Good, to a proposed transmission line. It's called the New England Clean Power Transmission Link that would transmit indirect current, clean renewable energy from Canada down through the lake, under the Lake Champlain, on into the grid in Vermont and points south as well as in Vermont. That was certified, and the idea was a provision of that certification was a stipulation among the parties that a public benefit fund would be created. I have provided a copy of that stipulation to Ms. Hussey, and if you want to look at what that does, what's important to the public, to the Clean Energy Development Fund and our board, is that it offers $100 million to be spent over 20 years in $5 million increments, which sort of puts the Clean Energy Development Fund and the board's responsibility back in play. I think that what we're asking is simply that the sunset date be extended by 2 or 3 years, and to provide a window of opportunity to determine whether this project will be built. In a press conference, what brought this to our attention was that the governor, and I think it was February 14th, in a press conference mentioned he'd just come back from the New England Governors Association, and there was a buzz about this project now being in play after all of us, and certainly those on the board, had given up any prospect of that actually coming to life. There's now quite a bit of activity underway. The alternatives which had displaced this project have run into problems. They've been, one was to go to New Hampshire. There were a number of possibilities that have come on hard times. So this project has risen in terms of its viability. But I think we've all been around on the merry-go-round. Your hopes rise and then they're dashed. You don't know really. I spoke with a colleague of mine, someone I've worked with at Velco just in getting ready for this hearing, to find out where things were. He was in Washington actually at that point, trying to see trying to help move this bill along, this project along. So it's really, it is alive, but it remains to be seen. So what we're asking is for you to buy time for us to make a reasoned decision about the future of the fund and the board. I'll make one more point, which all of my board colleagues feel is really important. As I look back over the history of the board and my role and the kinds of people I worked with, why not just have this program sitting in the Department of Public Service and let them run it? And the board, the advisory committee back in 2008 or so, the legislature said, we really want independent look at what the department is doing. When then at some point, a lot of money came in and they said, we think this oversight group is basically making all the decisions. Let's give them the chance to actually run the program. And they brought in another group of people to oversee it and make those decisions. It was another diverse. And then after that money spent out, and now we're in a different kind of a program, we had another group of people. And each time the stakeholder interests that were represented on the board really made for better decision making. And it also provided a regular forum where people can come in, stakeholders can come in and sit down with the board and find out where projects are and what decisions are being made and speak directly to people who will have an influence on the overall shape of the program. So we think that it has been very successful. The testimony to the Sunset Commission by the Department of Public Service basically gave the board good marks, basically said there'd be no reason to sunset this if there was a program. But since there's no program, there's no purpose, let it be. So at that point, I guess I'd leave it there for you. I've submitted all of these comments in written testimony, and I've provided a copy of the stipulation agreement that shows where the funds would be coming from. And I guess I ask you on behalf of the board to consider changing the sunset date by a couple of years.
How often does the board meet?
Quarterly now, with usually a cluster of meetings, more than we'll meet in October, January, December, March. We just had a meeting, March. And each year, the cycle is we approve the budget program for the next year that the department presents and develops. And we advise whether we think that the mix is right, whether the changing in the allocation of funding occurs. So for regular meetings, there's usually 2 or 3 extra meetings to get the work done.
And so the recommendation from the Sunset Advisory Commission was a repeal of 2025,
right?
And when do you think it's likely that we would know when the TDI project would go?
Honestly, I have no idea. I mean, we're all reading tea leaves at this point. This project had a lot of promise when it was being litigated. It's fully what's the strength of the project lies in it's fully permitted. Once the decision is made by the Department of Energy to fund it, it's not as though they have to then begin a long, lengthy process of getting environmental permits. There's strong support among all of the players for it to happen if there's a need for it. And the question, what has displaced it in the past, my understanding was that other projects had gone further and were the stronger commitments to actually lay out the money for it to go forward. So that's back in play. I spoke with my colleague in Velco. As I said, they have several $100 million that would flow to the Vermont Electric Company for the benefit of their customers if this thing goes through. So we're not the only one with an interest in this game. So the short answer is I really don't have a clue. My own experience, the reason why I added 2 years to going out 2 years is that my experience is that these kinds of decisions don't happen quickly, that there might be a tentative decision, but the thing could be derailed at the last minute. And giving it 4 years instead of 2 would certainly give you the opportunity. I also think that it would be healthy if the funds are forthcoming to look again at the mandate of the Clean Energy Development Fund and its board and reframe it in terms of existing conditions. Things change and that process. And I think the term sunset is, no one likes the idea of I'm working and somebody's going to pull the plug on me, but I think we all like the idea that when we show up at a meeting, we're doing something meaningful and that we have better things to do with our time than show up at meetings and
Yeah, and it's been I've been trying to recreate the culture that we've had the last couple of years, even though we have a very green committee, which is that we've tried to remind everybody on every board and commission that the idea with the sunsets isn't that we want to get rid of these things. It's just that we want to have the opportunity to be forced to reevaluate them, as you said. I don't have any particular heartburn about pushing the sunset out a couple of years, especially given the sort of low investment that we have to make in the CEDF. But does anybody else have any thoughts about if we push this out to 2027 instead of 2025?
No problems.
Nope. All right. So Mr. Devlin, who is on Zoom and I think is probably already working on the next week, can we add pushing the 25 to 27 on the clean energy?
Yes, that sounds good.
Well, I think that we'll see that in the next draft. Chair Swanson, any other questions from the committee?
thanks for, this has been fun. I enjoyed learning about a lot about your work. It's
great.
Keep it up. It's really good stuff you're doing.
Thanks for being here. Well, we're trying to make the government run a little more efficiently. We've got a lot of boards and councils and commissions. It's a lot to keep track of. But thank you for being with us today. Tim, I think we are ahead of schedule right now. We've asked you to do a couple of things. Would something like 30 minutes be enough to get back to us with an updated draft?
Sure. So I actually can probably give it to you in 5 minutes, I think. I've been working on it. So we wanted to add the two new instances of amendment in addition to the amendment that focuses on the Summer Government Accountability Committee. Just to confirm with you, Chair McCarthy. So the second instant of amendment would be regarding the benchmarking that Attorney Englander was speaking of, and then also pushing out the effective date for the Energy Committee. That should be, I think I have that written down in good form, and I can just maybe in 5 minutes or so send it to yourself and Andrea.
All right. So we've been working for about an hour and a half. So I'm going to give the committee a bio break, which will probably at least a few more minutes. So let's all be back here ready to go at 10:30. So that'll be a healthy break. We'll be able to get the new version of the amendment posted and let everybody have a bite of the delicious Red House Sweets, croissants and stuff behind us. So we'll be back in our seats at